Today we're going to talk a little bit about global supply chain and how it affects your business. If we go to the next slide, we're going to talk about how it affects your business, all the strange things that tend to happen and play havoc with your business when you're dealing with supply chain. We're going to see if you can manage it successfully. Are you set up to manage a global supply chain or even a local or national supply chain successfully with the systems that you have in place? We're going to look at the difference between a local/national supply chain versus a global supply chain. We're going to look at how it affects your customer and vendor management. What are the areas that you should be concerned about when you're looking at a global supply chain, and how it will affect your business and your costs of doing business. And then we're going to talk a little bit about the collaboration side and what would be required in any type of supply chain, be it global or be it local or national. What are the things that you need to be aware of, the information you need to make available, as well as the information that you need to gather. So let's start with the first one, which is on the next slide, which is basically how does it affect your business? Well, supply chains, especially if they're global, one of the things that you have to deal with is languages. You're going to find even though everybody says English is the language of business, it may be so when you're dealing with the executives, with the VPs and with account managers that have been hired specifically because they have that knowledge, that language. But the minute you step outside of those various functions in the company, you might discover the people you're talking to, or you're writing emails to, or leaving voicemails for, don't necessarily speak English, and if they do, they don't necessarily speak it very well. So you learn to have to deal with them in a different fashion very quickly, and you also learn to use the proper terminology to make sure that information is passed along properly. When you get involved in time zones, and that doesn't even have to be global, that could just be national here in the US or in North America, you've got time zones you have to deal with. So you have to build it into your processes that if you need to contact, if you need information, if you need to update anything, it has to be done given a certain timetable, and that timetable needs to be respected because in different countries, work is handled differently than it is in our home country. And when time to quit is there, family time is treated exactly as that, and they won't necessarily review or answer any emails or calls that come in their direction. Which brings us to the next level, which is lead times. When you start building and looking at your supply chain, global or national, it doesn't matter, lead times start playing a factor in there. And the lead times are based on not just the vendor lead times in order to get things to you, and as you expand and build different links into your supply chain, you're expanding your lead times. So you need to be very, very cognizant of that on the vendor side, which of course affects the customer side. So if the customer is looking at certain agreements that have been put in place with you, and they were put in place with a previous type of supply chain, now as you expand the links of your supply chain, those lead times are going to be affected as far as those customers are concerned. So you need to come up with a way of dealing with those and offsetting them. There's a bunch of different ways you can do that, all of which will cost money, and we'll talk about that later on as well. Complexity. You add links to your supply chain. Every link is a new level of complexity. Are you able to deal with it? Do you know how to deal with it? Do you have the information to the detailed level for you to deal with it? Do you understand that complexity? It's not just a handshake. Before you did that handshake and you signed the agreement, you sat down, you analyzed the complexity, and you decided it made sense to add that link into your supply chain. So complexity is extremely important. As I mentioned earlier, costs. Every link is a cost. That's just the only way you can look at it. There is no two ways about it. So what is it offsetting? Is that cost actually offsetting other costs? Or is that cost just adding costs? Is that cost figured out as a true cost, or is it just something that kind of makes sense? Are you comparing apples to apples when you're looking at your costs? And true landed cost, including intangibles, not just the costs themselves, but intangibles, such as risk assessment, such as inventory valuation costs that you're adding to it, and so forth and so on, are all added to that, because a true cost is not just made up of the fact that I add a whole bunch of invoices that I'm going to be receiving. The true cost is I'm carrying extra inventory because I've added links to my supply chain, and that's got to be compared. Communications. How am I getting information back and forth? How does this work together? How do people get me the information I need, and how do I get them the information I need? And what makes up that information we need to discuss and be aware of. On the next slide, we continue with how it affects your business. Staffing. Well, you're going to have to sit down and look at your present staffing and their capabilities, and then match it to the links that you have in the supply chain and make sure that you've got the right staff to be able to handle that. If you don't have the right staff, you're going to have a problem. It could be language. It could be understanding of the transportation requirements. It could be tariff and duties and legal requirements for importing materials and goods from overseas. It could be so many different things you're going to have to look at. Profitability. If you don't have a true cost for each of the links that you're adding, you're going to discover that your profitability, your intended profitability, is not going to be met. Your margins are not going to be met. And you're going to fall short of your expected goals on the profitability side. And that could be very, very negative for the company. Forecasting. The longer your links in your supply chain, the more important the demand and supply side forecast is going to be. And again, I emphasize the demand and supply side, which means that you have to build a forecast for your vendors that matches the forecast that you receive from your customers, plus any kind of risk assessment that you're going to build in your inventory level requirements. So forecasting becomes very, very expensive, and it moves to the forefront of a lot of the decisions that you're going to be making, which of course forecasting will affect your costs as well. So all of this is very tightly interrelated, and you've got to look at all these various points and all these various issues before you can make a decision as to whether that extra link makes sense or not. We talked about, can you manage your global supply chain? Given everything that we brought up as points, as important milestones for every decision you make on adding new links, well, first off, do you have the right software in place? Will the software that you've got there be able to support this new link and the complexities that are being added to your supply chain and to your processes internally? So software, I put it number one because as far as I'm concerned, a lot of people say, well, I've got spreadsheets, I've got Excel, I can integrate, I can do this, I can do that. That's not the way to go. What you're creating there is you're creating just, very weak bridges for information to travel. What you've got to have is you've got to have a very strong software system that pulls out the information that you need, that gives you the necessary KPIs, key performance indicators for you to review, and pulls out the right reports for analysis as you make these decisions. Without the right software, you don't have the second point. You will not have all the knowledge that's required to make a decision. What you're going to have is some very important points, which are true. You'll have knowledge in those areas, but will it cover all of the requirements that you need to analyze before you make that decision? The answer is a definite and absolute no. So be sure that you're going in there with your eyes open. Otherwise, the surprises are never positive in business. A surprise is always negative because a surprise is something you had not planned for. Partners. How do you deal with your partners? How do you get information across? How do they get information to you? How do you use the information they send you? How do you analyze it and then use it in order to turn around and deliver on what it is that you've committed to your partners? And your partners, again, I view partners as being both vendors and customers. You got to be able to partner on both sides. The supply chain is made up of links. Links require that you negotiate and you come up with a win-win situation for both sides. If it's a win situation for one side and lose for the other, that's a weak link. It's going to break. Somebody's going to give up. Either the customer is going to walk away or the vendor is going to walk away. And then you end up with an empty link, and you're scrambling, and it's costing you a lot of money to replace that link. Visibility into what's going on. Visibility in all of the information. Now, again, a lot of people will say, well, that will all come with the right software. That's absolutely true. But you need to be aware of this as you look at the software and as you make the decisions on where you're heading with the right software and the right information. Mobility. You've got to make sure that that information is available to everybody in a mobile fashion, whether it be internal for your people or whether it be external for your customers and vendors. So you've got to look at portals, both vendor and customer portals. You've got to look at information for the customers using, an e-commerce website and so forth and so on. What do you keep on that website? Your own website, how much information is in there that's available for people that are on the road who may have questions about a certain widget that you manufacture or you distribute. How can they get that information without placing a call in? Okay? Omni-channels. You got to be aware that as you're building up your supply chain, you got to be aware of how you obtain the orders and set up a system that takes that into account. If you're in a omni-channel situation where you get orders, through your e-commerce site, where you get orders through EDI, where you get orders through telephone, where you get orders through fax, where you get orders through email, how does your supply chain handle that? How do you deal with it? How do you manage that? And how do you encompass all that information to come up with the requirements that you have? And of course, are you capable of implementing and supporting new processes? Every new chain brings a new process. Can you handle it? You cannot necessarily use the same process that you had in place with a upstream chain or downstream chain, because every new chain is a new vendor that you might be bringing on board. There's a new bunch of issues as far as different countries. There's a new bunch of requirements as far as transportation and managing that transportation and so forth. So you've got to make sure that you've got the right system in place and the right capabilities in place, and most of all, that you've removed your blinders so that you can see what's required as far as new processes that you'll have to support. On the next slide, we're going to look at the difference in complexity between a local, national, and international supply chain requirements. And the reason I put local and national together is because, local could also be considered part of the same country. So I didn't want to set up a local, then a national, and then an international requirement for your global supply chain. I figured a local and national are the same because, you don't have to worry about tariffs. Transportation is from the same country. You don't have to worry about going across different borders and so forth and so on. And the language is, pretty much the same across the same country. So it removes a lot of the global requirements there. So I decided to split it as local and national versus international. So let's look at this first slide here that follows. This is your local, national type supply chain. Complex, of course, because there's everything that needs to be done there in order to have a true local, national supply chain system in place and management capability in place. So you can see there's a whole bunch. There's DCs, there's storage, there's distribution, there's vendors, there's customers, there's order management, fulfillments, logistics, and so forth, and all that comes into play as a requirement for a local national supply chain. On the next slide, now we're looking at a supply chain that's global, and all of a sudden you see that there's a lot more complexity that comes into play, not just on who do I get the order from and how do I place an order, but also on how it's going to be transported, the risks that one transport method has compared to another, the cost of one transport method as compared to another. How do I distribute the languages that I have to deal with across from one country to the next, the requirements as far as tariffs, as far as all the needs that your brokerage firm is going to require in order to get the products from one place to the next, and of course the potential acts of God that might take place as you're shipping from one part of the world to the next part of the world that you have to deal with and work with and be very cognizant of. So if you look at the next slide, I just added this slide because it kind of talks about creating an end-to-end supply chain visibility capability. Okay, you're looking at a distributor, you're looking at suppliers, you're looking at customers, you're looking at security that's required, you're looking at access. How's everybody going to get to you? Is it going to be on-site, on-premise? Is it going to be in the cloud? How are you going to support that? As you look at that, you got to think about What are you going to do with disaster recovery? What are you going to do with redundancy and so forth? How are you going to set that up? You're looking at omni-channel presence. How's that going to work? You're looking at wireless, mobility, and you're looking at interoperable systems. How does everything get to work with each other, and how does everything feed off of one another and into one another? So what you're looking at here is not just the fact that, I want to add a chain to my supply chain, is what do I need in order to add a chain to my supply chain, and what's going to make it successful? And a lot of people tend to forget that. They assume that as far as, supply chain is concerned, as far as software is concerned, you can interface, you can integrate. True, but is it the best way to do it? And do you have the right system to make it happen? And is it something that as change happens, the system can handle? You're looking at a system that needs to handle omni-channel presence. You're looking at wireless, security. There's so much that comes into play, and that system truly represent the real cost of adding that extra link? That's always very important, and people tend to forget the importance of that part of the requirements. So, if we look at the next slide, we're going to be looking at some of the things that right on top of making that decision. What are your customer expectations? If that new link you want to add is going to increase your costs above the willingness to pay point that your customers have, you shouldn't be considering it. If the costs of bringing it in are going to go above the willingness to pay point that your customer is willing to pay, you shouldn't be considering it. If the quality of the product coming in is going to be questionable and you have to increase your costs in order to meet customer expectations, then it's not because you're going to be doing your own quality, so the product's going to be quality tested twice, you shouldn't be considering it. So there's a lot of shouldn't be that come into play when you're looking at customer expectations. When you're looking at vendor expectations, well, it may be that, coming from a country so far away, potentially, if you're going to be offshoring it, then the vendor expects that you're going to place larger orders. Is that something that you're willing to live with? The vendor is going to give you certain lead times that may affect the way that you want to work with that vendor. Is that something you're willing to work with? The vendor is going to require a certain amount of information from you. Is that something that you're willing to add to your costs as far as adding that supply chain? That vendor is going to be looking at, so many other things, because there could be a whole bunch of government regulations that now you have to look at before you can do business with that vendor. Is that something that you're willing to work with? Internal expectations. Again, time zones. Are you going to be setting up multiple shifts to be able to talk to these vendors and get information across? Internal expectations are that that vendor is going to send me the information and answer my questions when they pop up. Time zones make that impossible. Internal expectations are going to be language. Can I speak to that customer? Different countries, different languages, different issues. So you've got a lot of internal expectations that you need to consider as you go towards it. You got to look at competitive pressures. Does it make sense to add that link if it puts you in a negative situation next to your competitors out there? Is their link more efficient than the link you're putting together? And if that's the case, well, is it bringing value to you, the customers? Not necessarily. Value add pressure. Again, the link that you're bringing to the table, the link that you're adding to your supply chain, has got to add value because you're out there and you're always being pressured to add value. So what value does that link bring? And lower costs is not always a value add, so you've got to be very aware of what it is that's coming up. It's going to put a lot of pressure on your change management processes. Are you capable of handling that? And of course, collaboration. I didn't put it at the end because it was the least important. I put it at the end because I wanted to spend some time on it. Collaboration is just one of the main points that you have to deal with, and we're going to talk further about it on one of the slides that's coming up. If we move on to the next slide, we're going to look at customer and vendor management. Collaboration pops up again. How do I deal with them? How do I get information across? How do I get the right information to make sure that both my customer is satisfied as well as my vendor is satisfied? So collaboration means that there's going to be a lot of negotiations, a lot of discussions, and a lot of information that's going to be required both on the demand and supply side. In other words, Mr. Customer, could you give me a forecast? Understanding that forecasts are usually not accurate, that's why they're called forecasts, but a forecast that we can work with and we can adjust as we go forward. Mr. Vendor, here's a forecast. Again, understanding that it's not accurate and it's not actuals, and we'll work with you to make sure, and our customers, to make sure the forecast that we're giving you, which would be demand, will make sense and will work properly with you as you meet my supply and then as I supply my customers. Preferences, understanding what it is that your customer wants, how they want it shipped there, how they want it, packaged, how they wanted this, how they wanted that, and so forth and so on. That's part of collaboration as well, as far as what your customer wants. The vendor also has preferences. How do you place the order? How do they ship it to you? How many containers are they willing to put out on a regular basis? The quantities that they can deal with, and so much more that you need to understand with them. And then, of course, there's the all-important, agreements as far as pricing. Pricing is something that you need to take into account as you look at competitive pressure. Competitive pressure could be multiple types of pressures. It could be competitive in that the cost. It could be competitive in that the value that they bring to the market is not just cost, but actually a lot of intelligence and a lot of understanding of customers' needs as part of what they roll into their products. So they may add consulting to it. They may add all kinds of free services such as installation and delivery and so forth. So those are some of the things you have to look at and take that into account in your pricing. And as you do that, then you're looking at things like shipping. How do I get it there? How do I get it to my location? How do I get it from my location to the customer's location, or the customer's site if they want to deliver to a site? Shipping falls into that. Services, is it just a question of selling the product, or is it a question of making sure that I've got people that can explain it, that I've got people that can talk to it, that I've got people that can actually go out there and implement it if that's what's required as far as services are concerned. So that's what you're looking at as far as customer and vendor management. On the next slide, we're going to be looking at collaboration, as I mentioned before. Well, some of the things that you're going to have to consider, and this goes back to the software, is do you have self-serve vendor and customer portals? They don't always want to call. They don't always have the opportunity to call or the capability to be able to call. They want to be able to pull up an iPad, a Surface, a phone, and bang, pop into your portal or your website and get the information that they need. They also want to be able to send it in certain ways. They want to be able to, they want you to update them through EDI. They want to place orders with you through EDI. Your vendor wants you to place orders with them through EDI. They want to update you through EDI. So are you set up for that type of collaboration? Can you work with whatever it is that you have in that type of collaboration? Electronic commerce, B2B, B2C. Are you equipped to handle that? Is your e-commerce capability such that you can grow with it and get the information that you need in there for your customers as part of the information that they need in order to run their business? Do you have a system that if issues pop up, it is capable of actually creating workflows and notices that can go not just within your four walls, but outside your four walls? In other words, let the customer know that there's an exception here and it's going to be late. The earlier they know that, the better they can react to it, the less upset they're going to be at you. Let your vendor know that you have a need, you have a change, something has happened, and that they're going to have to react accordingly. Again, the more lead time they have for it, the better they can react to it. And the more lead time you have, the better you can react to it. So are you capable of collaborating and getting notices and workflows outside your four walls? Which turns into sharing common goals and objectives. Can you make your goals and objectives known to your vendors and customers, who in turn make their goals and objectives known to you, so that you can see if your supply chain has the necessary links to make those your goals and objectives as well? Because if your customer's goals and objectives are different than your objectives, you will not have the proper supply chain set up, nor will you be able to have satisfied customers. The same applies with your vendors. The vendors will not be able to meet your requirements if goals and objectives do not mesh. So it's extremely important when you're looking at your supply chain that you not only look at the detailed side of it, but you also sit down with executives and see if the companies can all mesh together and make sure that you are all delivering together based on goals and objectives. On the next slide, what you're going to see is what we consider to be the type of software package that you need in order to be able to deliver to your customers. But what we're looking at here is a totally integrated, a total solution, a total enterprise solution. Not a point solution for this, not a point solution for that, not a point solution for bits and pieces, but a total ERP solution, which includes TMS, Transportation Management Software, as well as WMS, which is Warehouse Management Software, distribution software, retail commerce software, and of course Dynamics AX 2012 software. So those are extremely important pieces, and those pieces bring into play financials, forecasting, inventory management, purchasing, supply chain, merchandising, supply chain collaboration, vendor managed inventory, consignment, promotions, and chargeback. You're looking at a full product that can now meet the full requirements of your company, both internally and externally to vendors and customers. Because the important thing of a new product, if you're going to be looking at something to assist you with your global supply chain or a local or national supply chain, is that you have a product that then can turn around and can work hand in hand with other products out there, so that information can be captured as well as sent on to them by just creating the workflows that are necessary for that type of information, and having the capability of having the necessary security set up so that it only affects certain areas, which are the areas you plan to have affected, as well as for your customers and vendors, you only send information and touch the necessary areas there, through security clearances. What we also want to talk about is our advanced supply chain software solution, which helps you meet the requirements of a supply chain. So what you're looking at here is trade and promotions, advanced revenue management, which has trade and promotion management, cost to serve, sales programs, deduction management, all the necessary requirements that allow you to build the agreements that you're going to have in place between your vendor, yourself, and your customer. These are all extremely important and affect everything from pricing to services and specials and cost to bring your product to customers. So it's important that you look at the advanced revenue management side of it with all of the cost and pricing capabilities which allow you to reach the specific margins you're looking at. Then you need to look at advanced order management with counter sales, with credit checking, with order blocking, with product substitutions, upsell, downsell, left to qualify, Mr. Customer, if you buy 3 more, you get a better discount, lost sales tracking, duplicate order checking. Again, you're bringing the efficiencies to your CSR, but not only to your CSR, you're bringing the same efficiencies to your automated order entry processes, whether they be EDI, whether they be to an e-commerce system. Now the same information is available across multiple channels. It doesn't have to be somebody on the phone all the time that makes that information available to you and allows you to take advantage of it. You're looking at advanced inventory management with vendor managed inventory, consignment inventory, as I was mentioning, advanced landed costs, so you can get your true cost and true landed cost, advanced drop shipment, key performance indicators, customer allocated inventory. Again, when I talk about making sure that what you've got there and what you're working on is the same goals and objectives, these are some of the areas now that you're sitting down at, other than order processing side and revenue side, but actually how you're going to, the operational side, which is, hey, Mr. Vendor, I'm interested in vendor managed inventory. How are we going to make that happen That's the only way you're going to be part of my one of my links in my supply chain. Or a customer that turns to you and says, "Hey, I want consignment inventory." That's the only way you're going to be part of my, the next link on my supply chain. So it's important that you have the tools that allow you to manage how these links are going to be set up and how strong they're going to be. And then, of course, you've got to have the capabilities through key performance indicators. And if you look at the next slide that comes up, we're looking at just a cross-section of what we have available. We've got over 100 key performance indicators that we've added Dynamics AX, and these are indicators that are specific to a supply chain management requirement. So you're looking at cost to serve, you're looking at profit by customers, you're looking at recency, frequency, and monetary reports, you're looking at freight cost per unit shipped, you're looking at invoice but not received purchase order, and so much more. Gross margin, percentage by product, and so much more. That's actually part of the advanced business intelligence and analytics that's required in order for you to manage every one of those links inside that supply chain, because you don't manage a total supply chain. You manage individual links, which eventually allow you to manage and have a perfect, or at least as perfect as possible, supply chain as you move forward. A little bit about IBIS. We've been around for over 25 years. We have experienced people. We are AX experts, and we have professional consultants as well as project managers, and a proven process as far as our implementations are concerned. On the next slide, you'll see a little bit about our certifications. We are a global ISV. There's only 20 global independent software vendors that work with Microsoft. We are one of them, and that forces us to be, by contractual obligations, to always have the latest and greatest as far as our solution, advanced supply chain software, is concerned. Some of the trends that have brought us to this point. Things don't just happen. Software isn't just written. There's always a need. And some of the needs that are out there right now, if you look at market trends, well, your customers are much, much more demanding than they ever were. So you've got to have tools and capabilities to meet those requirements, otherwise you're not going to be in business for very long. Competition is increasing. Companies are no longer just working in their little patch, they're stepping out. Open sourcing is becoming one of the most important things in the market. We talk to more and more companies where they will buy and provide anything that their customer needs on their order, even if the items that they're asking for are not items that they usually sell or have ever considered stocking and selling. But in order to get the full order, their value add to the market is we'll sell you anything. So you might be buying a phone from them, but they'll also sell you a TV and coffee cups and chairs and whatever it is that you need in order to get it in there. Which means these people, these distributors now, are stepping into your patch by adding value to a customer that you're not ready to add yet. So it's increasing competition that's coming in, and it's coming in from companies and industries that you are not ready to compete with because that has not been your usual market. The complexity of supply chain is getting more and more complex. Every time you add a link, you're making it more complex. So you've got to be able to work with that. Consolidation, it almost comes back to the increased competition because now you've got companies that are stepping out there and buying companies in your patch, and all of a sudden, as they consolidate, they're bigger, stronger, supposedly, better managed, potentially have more dollars available, have more resources available, and that changes the competitive landscape for you. How are you going to deal with that? And all the pressure that everything that we've discussed is adding to your supply chain. And then, of course, you've got your operational business challenges, which is demand, pricing, and margin, of course. What's the right price? Is the demand the right one? Am I working properly with the demand? Am I picking up all the information I need? Am I achieving my margins? How to get increased operational efficiencies, how to make sure I deliver, real-time actionable information to both my employees, my suppliers, customers. Again, do I have the right software that allows me to do that and makes it totally a non-issue because it's done automatically and simply. Building brand loyalty and customer satisfaction. And of course, it is still labor-intensive businesses. When you're dealing with a lot of manufacturing or a lot of distribution, there's still a lot of labor that's required there. So It's very important to look at those operational business challenges. In summary, managing your global supply chain or your local national supply chain will assist you in your growth. If you do it right, you can grow. You can add to those links. You can remove links. They don't necessarily have to be adding links all the time in order to get to the level that you need to be at. You can actually start removing links, and your supply chain becomes leaner, and trimmer as you go to market with it. So that's, adding chain links is not necessarily always the way to go. As you analyze this, you'll discover that you want to potentially remove some chain links as you go forward in your supply chain. Managing your supply chain allows you to protect and increase your margin because you know what all the costs are, both external and internal, both upstream and downstream. You have the true costs. Therefore, you can actually come up with the proper or true pricing that you need in order to protect and increase your margins. The process is sustainable because you've analyzed it, you've worked with it, you've created the right processes to go with it. The people are trained accordingly, the customer is trained accordingly, and the vendor is trained accordingly. Yes, they need to be trained as well to make sure that the process works and keeps working. You become your global supply chain actually delivers a differentiator for you that allows you to compete and be stronger in the market because you've got knowledge. Knowledge is power, and real knowledge at the real time and actionable knowledge gives you a leg up on the competitive side with within your industry. And of course, with a true global supply chain that's really being managed properly, you have proactive collaboration, which means that you're actually talking, which means that you know that there's exceptions, which means that you have key performance indicators that are giving you visibility into potential issues and how to deal with those issues, and then collaborate both upstream and downstream with your customer and your vendor in order to make sure that you've got solutions for the issues that are starting to pop up, and then the process is adjusted accordingly. Thank you, everybody, and look forward to our next webinar.